Next, let's work on the remaining APIs. Add a new artifact, update an existing artifact, and delete an artifact. Those are super easy. So let's go back to IntelliJ. Go to controller. Okay. So first, let's work on post, which is create a new artifact. Okay. Add, this time is post mapping because the HTTP verb is post. Artifacts, public result, save. Okay, how do we save? The front end is going to send us some information about this artifact. For example, name, description, and an image URL, right? And then the controller needs to get those parameters and package it into an artifact and then save it using DAO, right? So what information will be sent to us? Again, let's go to API. So if I click add a new artifact to the collection, the client side agrees that when it launches this API, it will attach to this request those data in JSON format. It has 3 key value pairs: name, description, and image URL. So that means this mapping here will have those 3 key value pairs stored in the request body. Now the question is, how do we retrieve the 3 key value pairs and assemble them into a new artifact object and use Spring Data JPA to save them? Well, in previous projects, we have to use something called request.getParameter. Since this is a JSON, you cannot use request.getParameter. You have to use a reader to read in the entire string and use Jackson to deserialize it back to a Java object. So a lot of boilerplate code that make it verbose, right? So it's not really increase your productivity, it's decreasing it. So Spring Boot comes to save your life. That is, Spring Boot has a built-in data binder. So let me show you. It's really awesome. It is called @request_body. This annotation, we're using it to annotate a formal parameter. And this time, we're going to use artifact. New artifact. So by writing this line 31, Spring Boot, well, to be more specific, it should be Spring MVC, okay, Spring Web MVC, will automatically retrieve the JSON in request body and create an instance of artifact Java object and then bind name value pair to the private properties in new artifact using setter method. So inside this method, new artifacts will already have the values from the client. Isn't that great? But you have to use @request_body to do this automatic data binding. It means bind JSON data to a Java object. Okay, then we can invoke service to save it, right? So artifact service dot save. But for now, we don't really have this save method. So I'm calling a method that doesn't exist. So here, new artifact. And then once we're done, we can return new result. Okay, so let's see what is the result. Let's go back to Chrome. True 200 save success. Very simple. Okay. Next, let's work on save in artifact service. Void is okay. And here, we're going to save it in database. Artifact DO dot, remember, we have this save method for free. New artifact. Is this okay? Not really. If you take a look at Swagger, the front end only provide 3 fields: name, description, and image URL. What about ID? Of course, the front end cannot provide ID because the front end has no access to database. It doesn't know how database will assign ID, right? So you only provide name, description, and image. It is the back-end responsibility to provide ID. Then before we save it, we have to set ID. The question is, how do we set ID? So if you take a look at our artifact domain object, our ID is not generated automatically by our database. It is generated by our programmers using a certain algorithm. In this example, let me introduce a popular algorithm to generate unique ID for objects. It is called Snowflake. It's an algorithm from Twitter. I have already copied this file in my clipboard. Then I'm going to paste it into my project so we can use it as a utility class. Let me collapse those. Okay, right click, new a package. Let's call this utils because it's possible we're going to have more utility classes. Paste. So the class is called ID worker. There are many code in it, but you do not have to understand every single line of them. So there are two constructors, and we're going to use the second constructor, pass two arguments, worker ID and data center ID. We're also going to use this next ID because this method will return us a unique ID that we use for the artifact. Okay. Then how do we use this ID worker? We have to let Spring know that the existence of this class. And when Spring Boot is started, Spring can create an instance of this class ID worker and treat it as a bean. And we can do that in the main class. Now, do you remember? Hogwarts Artifacts Online application.java is the entry point of this entire project. There is a main method in it. In the same class, after this main method, let me create another method. Public ID worker. So this method returns an ID worker. And inside, I'm going to return an instance of this class. I'm going to pass two arguments to it, worker ID and data center ID. Okay, that's not enough. This is just a regular method, and Spring doesn't know that this is a bean. So we have to add bean annotation to it. After this, when Spring Boot is started, this method from line 15 to line 18 will be executed. The returned instance of this ID worker class will be treated as a bean. If another bean needs this bean, Spring can inject this ID worker bean into the bean that needs it. In this case, artifact service. Now remember, in artifact service, we need this bean ID worker to create next ID, which is a new ID. Okay. So if a class needs a dependency, and here's how I do it. We're going to first declare a private field. So besides artifact DAO, this bean also depends on this one, ID worker. That's step one. Step two, we have to inject it, right? And how do we inject? Use constructor argument. Well, I'm lazy. I do not want to modify this constructor. I simply just delete it and let IntelliJ generate it for me. Now this time, Spring will inject two beans to artifact service. Okay, so I'm going to change this comment and an instance of ID worker. Okay, so once we have this bean injected, then we can use ID worker dot next ID. So down here, ID worker dot next ID. Well, this won't work because, okay, next ID returns long, but our ID is of type string. So we have to convert it from long to string. Well, the easiest way to do that is we simply just concatenate an empty string. So that's the simplest way to convert integer or long or other type to string, just a plus empty string. That's all for artifact service. Let's go back to controller. Now the code in controller is also done, so we're done. So this API is completed. Next, let's test this. So we're gonna launch our program. Okay, Tomcat has been started. All right, so before we test it in Postman, so let me show you H2 console. All right. Okay, so refresh, connect, click this, run it. Right now, there are 6 artifacts, as you can see here, because when we start this application, data initializer gets called and inserts 6 artifacts. So now our goal is use this create to add a 7th one, okay, a new artifact. Let's go to Postman. First, let's create a new request. Let's call it save a new artifact. Okay, so it belongs to this collection. All right, save. All right, change it to post because this is a post request. And here is the URL, localhost. So make sure I don't have a typo here. Okay, so this endpoint is the same as find all, right? Localhost 8080/artifacts. Then where do we put the new artifact? The answer is in request body. So click here, click raw, and change it to JSON because the client side, so right now this Postman is the client side. So this is our request method, this is the endpoint, and this is the data with this request. Then what is the format of this data, of this artifact? Don't know. Let's go to API. Go to Chrome. Here is Swagger. As you can see, this is a post method, and this is endpoint, and this is the agreed upon format of the data the front end or the client side is going to send to the server side. So let me copy this and go to Postman and paste. Well, since we already have a delimiter in our database, so let's change this to a new artifact. I have already prepared a new artifact, a new magic artifact from Harry Potter. All right, it is Philosopher's Stone. And here's the description, and this is a URL. Now, this is not a real URL, right? All right, so we're gonna send this JSON data, the 3 name value pairs or key value pairs from client side to the backend. Everything's good, post, endpoint, and this is body, it's JSON, everything's good. So send. As you can see, true, 200, save, success. So we got response from the backend. How do we verify? Let's go to H2. Well, before this save new artifact, there are 6 artifacts in the database, right? Now this time, I'm going to run it again, select asterisk from artifact. As you can see, we got a 7th one. There are 7 rows in it. Philosopher's Stone, image URL, and this is description, and this is the ID generated by ID worker. As I said before, the algorithm behind ID worker is from Twitter. It's called Snowflake. If you're interested, you can Google Snowflake Twitter ID to see how it generates a unique ID. Okay, next we're going to implement update and delete.